Hi, I'm Max Clark. I'm going through some Q&A. The question is related to flat rate circuits versus burst and why I push people away from flat rate circuits. Okay, we should talk about bursting first and different options for burst. Some carriers will give you dynamic capacity. I'm going to go back in time here. Let's say you ordered a 100 meg circuit. They deliver you a 1000 meg port, cap you at 100 meg via rate limiting mechanism, and then you could call in, you could get dynamic capacity and bursting up to 3x your circuit speed. So you could go from 100 meg to 300 meg and then back down to 100 meg after some amount of time. By the way, you paid a mighty premium for that circuit, for that burst. I don't like that burst. You know, that kind of product in the telecom, it's almost completely died out. There's a reason why it's almost completely died out. It's not a great product. I'm talking about nth percentile billing. So most commonly it's 95th percentile billing. Some carriers will do 90th percentile billing. The way a 95th percentile billing works is a port gets delivered to you. This is very common in the data center world. If you're in a carrier neutral data center facility, if you're in a data center, if you're building on a POP and you're taking some kind of high capacity circuit, you know, in a wholesale carrier space or way, you're going to get a bursting circuit, 95th percentile. And you've got really four things of that circuit, right? You've got the port speed of that circuit, what the port capacity is, 1 gig, 10 gig, 100 gig. I mean, technically you do 40 gig, but who does 40 gig? So 100 gig, 400 gig. You've got the committed information rate, CIR. Some people say committed data rate, CDR, but let's just say CIR. So if you take a 10 gig circuit, your CIR, your minimum CIR on that circuit would be 1 gig, 10%. Some carriers will force you into 20%. 10% is pretty standard, especially for common circuits. Like today's world, 10 gig, you just get a 1 gig CIR. If you're at 100 gig, maybe you see some carriers that want to push you into 20 gig CIR. Just know you can usually get 10 gig for that. So that CIR is the minimum amount that you're going to pay every month. So that's your fixed committed, you're going to pay this bill. So you've got your port speed, you've got your CIR, you've got your price for your CIR, and then you've got your bursting rate. 20 years ago, your bursting rate was going to be a multiple of a premium on top of your CIR rate. 300%, 100, 200%, 150%. Good old days of bandwidth, maybe you're paying $5 per meg on your CIR and you're paying $7.50 a meg on your burst. So there was an incentive for you to optimize your commit rate versus your burst because of the billing structure. Nowadays, in today's world, it's the norm to see your bursting rate the same as your commit rate. So your commit rate will decrease and your burst rate will be fixed with whatever your commit rate is. So if you're committing to 1 gig, there's a better rate if you commit to 2 gig or 5 gig, but you're not paying an additional premium on that burst. So the last part of this is the actual billing engine. And there's a lot of subtleties with this one, and you have to read the fine print. So what's supposed to happen is every 5 minutes, the carrier's billing system is going to sample the speeds. They use SNMP, they interrogate the switch or the router, and they pull stats off the port, and that stat counter that comes back shows you, reports a counter, and it just says, you know, okay, at this reading, the counter is this number, and it shows you an in number and an out number. And so this gets recorded into the billing system. At the end of the month, 95th percentile is a statistical representation. So you take all of the numbers that have been received and you order them from highest to lowest. And when you say you, this is what the software is doing. It gets ordered from highest to lowest, and the top X%, so the top 5% of samples are ignored, and then the next sample is what becomes the actual build sample list. And when I say there's some subtleties and there's some things you have to read the fine print on, for the most part, your traffic pattern is going to be consistent on a month-over-month basis. You're going to have heavy ingress. So if you have a lot of eyeballs, you're going to be pulling traffic into your eyeballs. So if you're in an office, you're pulling traffic in. If you're a residential ISP, you're pulling traffic in. If you're serving content, you're pushing traffic out. If you're in some sort of P2P or a blockchain application, you're probably equalized. You're seeing the same traffic in and out. You know, it's equal. But the reason why I point this out is the billing system will take an order, could either take an order, all of the ingress and all of the ingress, drop the 5th percent, and then look at what's higher ingress or egress, or it can do it on a sample by sample basis. So with each entry, each 5 minutes, could say ingress was higher, egress was higher, ingress was higher, egress are higher, and depending on which one they're doing, you end up with different rates, and that rate could be higher or lower for you. It's not a huge deal, but it is something just to be aware of and understand how that billing system billing engine actually works. The trick and the secret with 95th percentile billing is you will never run, I mean, exception of P2P and blockchain, you will never run your circuit at full tilt. If you do, let me know. Flame me below in the comments, fine, but whatever. For the 99.159s of the rest of the world, you never run your circuit at full tilt. With my network service provider, when we were running this and doing Metro Ethernet circuits for enterprises, it was unusual to see a customer with an nth percentile at 95th percentile at 30% of their circuit capacity. So for our internal network capacity sizing, we were sizing full circuits and understanding what would happen if all of our customers went full tilt. But the expectation with a customer when we were actually doing pricing and selling gig circuits, for instance, it was very strange to see a customer with a 300 meg 95th percentile. The average office was probably running somewhere in the lines of like 300 to 400 person office with a gig circuit. Their 95th percentile was usually like 30 to 40 meg, 50 meg. Now, bandwidth consumption has gone up to some degree, but it's still, I mean, think about that from a service provider over under. You're buying a gig circuit and you're using 30 meg because that's, by the way, how the service provider gets billed. The service provider gets charged by the cost of delivering the port to you. So what does that circuit actually cost to get to wherever you are? In a data center, that's zero because they're not paying for it. You're paying for the cross connect. In a metro environment, they're either constructing fiber to you or they're paying somebody else for that fiber. So there's a different cost, right? So the cost of the actual circuit to you is one half. The other half is the actual assumed cost of bandwidth. So if they've sold you a gig worth of capacity, you're paying for a gig worth of capacity, and they're only paying for 30 or 40 meg, it's a phenomenal arbitrage for them. This is where service providers actually make money, especially since their buy rate is much lower than their sell rate, right? So if you've never done this, it's a little scary because you don't really understand what it's going to cost you. And this is why having no premium on your burst rate is great. I mean, so get a 10 gig circuit, sign a 1 gig CIR on that circuit, budget it for the whole 10 gig of consumption. If you really, by the way, doing it that way is not going to be much more money than just committing to the full 10 gig at the first place. Budget it for 10 gig, and guess what? You're going to end up with like 9 gig worth of budget capacity, probably month over month, that's coming back into your budget, and it's going to be wonderful. You're going to be able to reallocate that money to other places. If you have the option to take a 95th percentile, take the 95th percentile. It is almost always going to work out in your favor, especially if you're talking about delivering capacity into a location, so into your office, into your warehouse, into your manufacturing facility, whatever it actually is, where you have users sitting. If you've got users, if you have eyeballs where you're consuming, you're pulling bandwidth in, 95th percentile is just a phenomenal advantage for you. And then you get all the benefits. Okay, so anyways, top, bottom, what does that mean? Average month is 730 hours of traffic. You get roughly 30.1 hours of free bandwidth every year. If you're doing the math, if you're doing a nightly backup, when you're putting something off-site to an immutable backup, some kind of cloud-based archival storage. If you've got a 10 gig circuit, you could saturate that 10 gig circuit at 10 gig, 1 hour night for the entire month, and it doesn't impact your bandwidth. So, think about your offsite replication, offsite bandwidth costs of how long does it take you to run your incrementals, run your backups, send that data out. And if you're on a 1 gig versus a 10 gig, what would change? Yeah, go get a free 10 gig, get a 10 gig. Use it to saturate your your backups, your offsites, create a return to office benefit for your company and for your employees where, hey, we've got 10 gig. You're probably not 10 gig to the desktop yet. Hopefully you're in an upgrade cycle that's going to start kicking in where you're going to do 2.5 gig to the desktop. Maybe you skip 2.5 gig and you go straight to 10 gig to the desktop. But, slow bandwidth sucks for people. Fast bandwidth is great. People should sit down at their desk and browse the internet and be like, wow, this thing is so fast. I didn't even know what happened. Anyways, I'm going to go on a complete tangent. I'm going to try not to get it together. That's why I tell everybody, if you can, and the service provider supports it, take the option, get a 95th percentile, do the bursting bandwidth. It's fantastic. It's going to work in your favor. You're going to get more bandwidth for less money. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns. Put them below. We'll get back to you.
Feel it.